All right, everybody, we're going to get started. As I said, when there were fewer people in the room, thanks for spending the hottest day of the year with us talking about wetlands. Really appreciate your time and attention. We're going to get started here. We released yesterday morning. I think many of you probably saw the report come out, a new report called Get Your Feet Wet, exploring New York State's updated freshwater wetland regulations. And before we get deeper into the slides here, I just want to explain why we decided to do this. I think it's true across the region that the new wetlands regulations have been, one of the top three civic discussions that we're hearing about everywhere we go. And in typical fashion, in predictable fashion, what we've seen happening across the region is sort of people splitting into two camps, sort of a pro-conservation, pro-environment camp and a pro-development camp. But we really wanted to try to provide some insight into the updated regulations from where Pattern lives, which is really on the double yellow line. And we wanted to talk about why it's not great that in 1975 we probably missed 1 million acres of wetlands that should have been regulated and protected, and talk about all the important things that wetlands do for us and why we should protect them in the first place. And at the same time, we wanted to be able to talk about some of the real concerns that we're hearing and for which there are evidence about the way the regulations are being carried out. Are the new process staffed up the way it should be? Is it causing delays to what is already one of, if not the slowest land use review processes in the entire United States here in New York? And we wanted to be able to talk about these things, as I say, from the double yellow line so that we could really give a dispassionate, objective, pattern style primer to the Hudson Valley on what this is, why it was put into place, and what we ought to think about it as we start to iron out some of the stumbling points and tripping points and challenges. So to get us started, I want to mention a couple things. This is part of Pattern's independent research agenda. For those of you who've been with us for a while now, either as a supporter or someone who follows us out there in civic society across the 9 counties that we serve, you know that the hallmark of Pattern across the last 60 years has been our independent research, and we've really tried to ramp that up over the past few years. So I just wanted to acknowledge we have a couple of other big reports coming out in August. I like to think of it as Affordability August. We're going to be releasing our annual Out of Reach report later this week, which outlines data related to housing costs, rental costs, wages. And we're going to be releasing later in the month a roundup of the really wonderful work that the United Way does on ALICE, asset limited income constrained employed. This is sort of a review of what you might consider our working poor in the region. So look out for those coming out in the next couple of weeks. And then I did want to just underscore, we've released some things recently that if you haven't seen, I think you should. We released a report on the new kind of public transportation called microtransit. Putnam County became the first to adopt this model and is seeing in the first couple of months massive success that we think is replicable across the region. We issued a report called Capacity to Compete with a group of students from NYU about sort of the difficult landscape for applying, competing for grants in the region and how to make that better. And last year, we released a report called When Hotels Become Home, which was all about the fact that we have more people living, especially working folks, living on public assistance in our local hotels because there are not enough modest rentals in the region. So we have folks like grocery store workers, certified nurses assistants, administrative aides living in large numbers in local hotels on public assistance. And how should we think about that and what we do about that to make that better? But today we're here to talk about our new wetlands report. And I want to underscore that this report and all the others I talked about are made possible by the support of our 200 Pattern members. Since we were founded in 1965, we have been a nonprofit membership corporation. The ability for us to have the time and talent necessary to work on these reports is directly connected to the fact that we have a really wonderful membership base that provides us with the support needed to do the research, do the planning, and report back to all of you to help make decisions based on information instead of innuendo. And in the case of today's report, we did receive some additional special support from our friends at Harris Beach Murtha, attorneys based in both White Plains and Albany. And we have Javed Afzali on today. Javed, if you want to come off mute for a minute and explain, why you guys chose to support this, a little bit about what you're seeing out there. The floor is for yours for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Adam. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Javed Afzali. I'm a partner at Harris Beach Murtha. It's a pleasure to help kick off today's webinar on updates to New York's wetland regulations. This is an especially timely conversation because the regulatory landscape around wetlands in New York is evolving in ways that impact virtually every sector, from municipalities to developers to utilities, agriculture, and energy products. At Harris Beach, we work with a wide range of clients throughout the Northeast. Navigating environmental permitting and compliance and wetlands regulations is one of the most challenging areas we see right now. So whether you're a municipal official tasked with reviewing land use plans and applications, a real estate developer evaluating sites for new or expanded investments, or really anyone else interested in better understanding how the state is balancing economic development and wetlands protections, the regulatory landscape is now more complex in New York than ever, and a lot more to understand for site selection, construction timelines, and informed permitting decisions. The state's expansion of regulated freshwater wetlands, combined with the changes at the federal level, particularly after the second EPA decision, has created a complex and sometimes overlapping framework. Many property owners, municipalities, and developers are just beginning to understand how these rules may affect projects that historically would not have triggered state jurisdiction. We are seeing an increased scrutiny during permitting, more robust field delineations, and in some cases, unexpected project delays because of new wetlands mapping and regulatory thresholds. That's why today's conversation is so important. Staying informed is not only key to compliance, but also to proactive planning and project success. Today, you'll hear from Pattern on what has changed under the regulations, including how jurisdictional wetlands are now identified and how the state is implementing the new procedures to date. And they'll share unique insights into what to expect going forward so that there's greater clarity for the path forward. Now, as a law firm, we believe in supporting organizations like Hudson Valley Pattern for Progress because they bring together thought leaders, industry professionals, and policymakers to tackle the issues that shape the future of our region. Pattern's work in providing data, analysis, and a forum for dialogue directly aligns with our commitments to helping our clients anticipate challenges and find practical, forward-looking solutions. We're proud here at Harris Beach to support today's webinar and look forward to the insights our speakers Eric Bosch and Adam Pearson will share. With that, I'm very pleased to turn it over to our speakers to get us started.
Thanks, David. I appreciate it. So we're going to hop right into it. I'm going to turn it over to Eric Pearson, one of my colleagues here at Pattern who led the research on this report. He's going to take you through the first half. I'll take you through the second half. Eric, go ahead and kick it off.
Okay, thanks, Adam. Good afternoon, everybody. So before we dive into some of the key changes, I wanted to just go over a broad strokes overview of what we're talking about today. So these new regulations really represent the first significant update to long-standing freshwater wetland regs that have been in place since the 70s in New York State. So why did the DEC decide to do this? Well, one of the main reasons was, by their estimation, up to 1 million acres of freshwater wetlands that were always intended to be protected were just simply missed by the mapping that was done in the 70s. One important thing to note here is that these new rules do not change what activities are regulated, but instead these changes are come in the form of the way that how wetlands are identified and classified. And so the vast majority of these changes have already gone into effect. They went into effect at the beginning of this calendar year in 2025. And then there's one more component of the new regulations that we'll discuss later that is slated to come online in 2028. So next slide. So we wanted to also just pause before we go into these changes to briefly go over why New York is bothering to protect wetlands at all. Wetlands provide numerous direct benefits to humans, indirect benefits to the, environment. critical habitat for several species of wildlife and plants, many of which are endangered. They provide an important role in flood mitigation, so their ability to slow down and store flood water is increasingly important as we have more extreme weather events here in the region. And then they also play an important role in drinking water. So they have an ability to break down certain pollutants, and they also play a role in sort of recharging some of our drinking water sources in our aquifers. So that's not even all of them, but all of these benefits, I think it's fair to say, are difficult to attach, easily attach a monetary value to them. So, their collective benefit is really important. So that's why these regs are also very important. And then as was already sort of discussed briefly, there are federal wetland regulations. They're certainly in flux at the moment with some of the Supreme Court decisions. And then I think it's also fair to say that in general, at the federal level, the protections are trending towards less protection. Next slide. So patterns report. There are several webinars, articles about this, and as Adam mentioned, one of the ways that we feel this report is important is to provide a balanced, objective review of these changes, and then also I think where this report goes beyond others is a look at the potential impacts and some of the early impacts of the new changes. There's also interactive maps within the report. So if you want to go zoom into your community, zoom into your property and take a look at some of the changes that the new mapping has brought about. All right, so at this point, we can dive into some of the key regulatory changes of the new rules. So the first major regulatory change has to do with mapping. Under the old rules, there was a regulatory map of wetlands in the state, and that was pretty much the authority on the location of regulated wetlands throughout the state. Under the new rules, this map has been replaced by a new non-regulatory map. And instead, this map is just sort of the first step in identifying where potentially regulated wetlands may be. The new informational maps were created by the Institute of Resource Information Sciences out of Cornell, and they used a very sophisticated methodology that incorporated satellite imagery. So the new maps, they're more accurate, but again, the important distinction here is that they are now non-regulatory, and they're just sort of that first step to identify where you might have regulated wetlands. So next slide. So the next key change to discuss is the new multi-step jurisdictional determination, or JD process. So say, for example, you want to do a project, you use the informational map that we just talked about to look at your property, and you find that there likely is a wetland, the map is saying, on your property. Your next step would be to submit what's called a parcel JD to the DEC. And the DEC will use remote analysis to establish whether jurisdictional wetlands are present or not on your parcel. And all of those parcel JDs statewide are handled by one office in Albany remotely. So if you get a negative determination, that means you don't have jurisdictional wetlands and no further action with the DEC is necessary. If you get a positive declaration, you move on to the next step, which is called a project JD. And so with the project JD, you start to get a little bit more detailed. You need someone to go out to the property to delineate the wetlands. So this could be a hired consultant, or it could be staff from your local DEC regional office. And so once you have your delineation in hand, you submit that as part of your project JD with a detailed site plan to your regional office, and they determine whether your project is, impacting a regulated wetland or the regulated adjacent area. So if it is, then, at that point is when you have to work with the DEC to figure out if there's any mitigating steps you might need to take to get a permit to do the work that you're trying to do. Next slide. So the next key change is wetlands of unusual importance. This is a brand new set of 11 criteria established under the new regs. If a wetland of any size meets any of these criteria, they are considered to be a wetland of unusual importance, and then that means they fall under the jurisdiction of the DEC. I'm not going to go through all these right now. When I hand this over to Adam to talk about some of the potential impacts, there's a couple of these that we're going to highlight that we think might have an early impact in the region. Next slide. And so right now, under the new regs, there's a minimum sort of default minimum wetland size that will trigger a wetland to be regulated, jurisdictional by DEC, and that is 12.4 acres. Of course, as I just mentioned, wetlands of unusual importance of any size are regulated. And then this is that next piece of the new rules that hasn't gone into effect yet, but in 2028, the minimum size, default size for regulated wetlands will go down to 7.4 acres. So in 2028, there will be more wetlands in the state that are, regulated under these new rules. Next slide. And then finally, there's a grace period. So, understanding that new regs such as this, sort of a pretty substantial change, would be very disruptive to projects that are already pretty far along in the process. So there's sort of three overarching criteria that you wouldn't have to be following these new regs if you have a negative declaration for a type 1 or unlisted action under seeker, or if you have a final EIS accepted by a lead agency or a written site plan approval from a local government. Next. And so, yeah, that's the sort of overview of what the key changes are. And now I think we'll head into what I think is more the interesting part of this presentation is our estimation of what the potential impacts and some of the early impacts of these key changes will be.
Great. And before we do that, I'm going to try to do something on the fly here. So stick
Oh boy.
Yeah, oh boy, you never know. Things on the fly don't always work out. But I'm going to share, I just wanted to share very quickly the mapping that was done for this project because I think, people always like a map, right? But it also underscores what we're talking about. So Eric built this map. He did a very good job of it. You all can go on to the study today and look at this map. This is a comparison between, in purple, the areas that were regulated by the 1975 map and the areas that are now subject to the process that Eric just explained, the jurisdictional determination process. And you can see here, we're zoomed in on what I would call the greater New Paltz area, right? And you can see the additional wetlands that were picked up as we use this scroll function here, the additional wetlands that were picked up by the process. This is some of the million acres that we likely missed in the 70s. And it just gives you a sense of the old regulations versus the new informational map that will drive that whole jurisdictional determination process. So before I get into the last part of the presentation, I figured I would just share that as a preview for those of you who want to go through the study and take a look for yourselves. So let's see if I can do this on the fly again. Okay, good. Eric, does it look good? I'm back on the slides. All right, fabulous. So now we're going to talk about what to watch for. It's important to understand that we're really only 6 months into this process. So it's unfair to say definitively what's going right, what's going wrong, what needs to change. So instead of having conclusions and recommendations, in this study, we really just wanted to highlight some things to watch for that we're hearing about most often, that we've seen letters on, that we have data on. And the first one is delays, okay? We know that that DEC staffed up in its Albany office. As Eric mentioned, that first parcel JD goes to the central office in Albany, but there are some early indications that there is a bottleneck within that process that's slowing down the processing of those parcel JDs. There was a notice put on the DEC website asking people to give them the full 90 days because they had received an unprecedented number of requests. And so we know that that's happening. The regional office staff capacity to process delineation requests. Once you get your jurisdictional determination and they tell you whether you're under jurisdiction or not, whether there's a wetland or not, the ability for the regional office to then send a biologist out to do the delineation is another potential bottleneck. We also think there might be a little bit of a bottleneck if people want to hire their own consultant. We're we're blessed here in the Hudson Valley to have a pretty high consultant capacity, but it's certainly not unlimited. You'll see in a few slides, we've gotten about 1,200 JD requests from the Hudson Valley in 6 months. It's hard to imagine that our hometown consultant capacity could do, 6, 7, 8 delineations a day. It's going to be hard to keep up with. And one of the things we see is some developers are kind of skipping ahead and saying, hey, I'm just going to go hire a consultant to do the delineation before I even apply, so that once they tell me whether I'm under jurisdiction or not, I already have the delineation done. So they're trying to speed this up on their own and get ahead of it. Incentive to get a parcel JD before the minimum wetland size decreases in 2028. Eric mentioned that that minimum regulated size is going to decrease. So there's kind of a rush on the shop, if you want to think of it that way. Hey, let's get our delineations, let's get our determinations, let's get all that done before the wetland size, regulated size goes down. There is some degree of that. It's hard to tell how much, but that's something we need to think about. Now, why are the delays happening? Because, I mean, in the first 6 months, the state has gotten an unbelievable number of jurisdictional requests. So statewide, between the 1st of January and pretty much the end of June, 5,211 requests were submitted statewide. That bottom number there, 56%, is what the state has gotten through up to that date. So it was able to process about half of them. And almost a quarter of all requests statewide came just from Region 3, which includes the counties that you see there on the right. Now, to me, this is no surprise. For those of you who remember our good old friend Willie Janeway, who used to be the regional director going back to the early 2000s, I mean, Willie always used to tell me that these things are sometimes toughest in the Hudson Valley because we are where development pressure meets nature, right? And so you end up seeing that when a regulation like this gets put into place, sort of the way it affects the Hudson Valley is a little more acute or a little more intense, or we just are the ones where that regulation sort of meets the road. So this is just a sense of what we've seen so far in the data from the state. Other things to watch for. So when you have a development project, one of the first questions you have to ask as part of the seeker process on your environmental assessment form is there a regulated wetland present on any part of your project site? Before the regulatory change, you could go look at the 1975 regulatory map and say yes or no. You can't do that anymore. Now you have to wait, several months to be able to answer that question. You have to get your parcel JD, you have to go do the delineation, and that's going to add some delay to, as I pointed out, what's an already very slow land use process. So here, one of the things we're pointing out is it's important to try to be able to answer that question quickly so we're not delaying the process. We want to answer it accurately. We want it to be a science-based, accurate answer so we're protecting important resources, important ecosystems, but we don't want more delays on top of an already slow process. Wetlands of unusual importance. So I want to go over a couple of these. So wetlands of any size are regulated if they meet one of these 11 criteria. And there's a few that could be challenging in the region. They're highlighted here. Wetlands that are situated within or adjacent to an urban area as defined by the Census Bureau. Ones that contain rare endangered plant species. In our region, the vast majority, nearly all of them, tend to. Provides critical habitat for essential behaviors of endangered, threatened, or special concern species or species of greatest conservation need. And number 7, identified as a vernal pool that supports productive amphibian breeding. Let's go into a little bit of depth on a couple of these. Endangered species. Due to their protected status, their locations are not publicly disclosed. So when you go out to perhaps purchase a parcel or a project starting to get formed, the state doesn't disclose where those protected species are for good reason. They're protected, right? If we know where they are. So you have to go through that process and may end up finding that because of the location, the presence of a protected species with protected status, that you may have a real hiccup in your project or have to shrink the size of it or do other things. Vernal pools are a really interesting case. There's now a regulation that doesn't have a minimum size Regulated adjacent areas are determined on a case-by-case basis, okay? This is part of the regulations that are very open-ended, okay? Not only on what's regulated, the size, the buffer, the shape of the regulated area is going to be determined based on biology, based on a professional going out and thinking about where do the species migrate when they come out of the vernal pool? How large is the vernal pool? Where does it actually form when you get the snow melt and the rain in the spring? And if you apply for a project or a determination like today, when a lot of our vernal pools, or all of them, are really dried up, you may have to wait all the way until the spring to when those vernal pools reemerge in order to get a determination under the regulatory regime that's in place now to understand, is a vernal pool there? What's the size and shape of it? What's the migratory patterns of the species coming out of it? And that means that this particular part of the regulations could cause a much longer delay and be more complicated because of the need for a science-based answer than other portions of the regulations. Then urban areas, wetlands of any size in urban areas are regulated. Now, in our region, in the Hudson Valley, we have a pretty large number of urban areas. So you have pretty much all of the developable area in Rockland County is considered an urban area by the US Census. A little more than half of Westchester County, and then you all know the other areas in here, which are our Newburghs, our Middletowns, our Port Jervises, our Beacon, Poughkeepsie, Kingston, Liberty, Monticello, Fallsburg, Hudson, right? All those places. So if you are looking to develop in one of these places and you have one of those green specks on the informational map that we showed, no matter what size it is, you are likely going to be under jurisdiction and be regulated. There is no size limit to that particular part of the regulation, and that means that one of the things we want to watch for as these regulations play out, as the DEC refines and improves the process, is whether we incidentally kind of conflict with other state priorities. Things like smart growth. We really want to try to concentrate development in our cities, in our villages, in our hamlets, in our downtowns that have water and sewer and trains and transport. And, are we going to run into a place where those two things start butting heads? Clearly, there's a desire and a need, as we've documented, as others have been, talking about a lot, to build more housing throughout the state. There's now a pro-housing initiative in the state. Are we going to run into places where we could, should, and ought to build housing, and those projects have to be downscaled or can't be done because of this? Not only that, more importantly, are we adding lag time into the process? We don't want to build housing on wetlands in the first place, but are we just building lag time and more soft costs and more other types of costs into the process that makes the eventual housing expensive when we know we need housing that's affordable for people across the entire spectrum of incomes, but especially people of modest means right now in the economy that we're in the housing market that we're in? And then renewable energy. There are some other agencies that have taken the regulatory lead on determining where renewable energy can and can't be cited. Is there a conflict here potentially? We don't know yet, but it's one place that folks pointed out where there needs to be some careful watching and monitoring in the future. Want to give DEC some credit. They recognize that some elements of this need to be sped up. Again, we want to make sure we're arriving at a science-based answer about where there are wetlands and where there are not, and where should we protect and where should we allow development. That has to be a decision that's driven by sound science. But we also want to make sure that where there are activities, common activities, pre-approved activities, that there is a way to get a permit a little bit quicker to take care of those. So the state has proposed a number of general permit that may expedite the permitting process in many cases, has a list of pre-approved activities such as repair, reconstruction of existing structures, certain types of fences, fire hydrants, minor utility infrastructure, upgrades or repairs, certain vegetation cutting or hazard tree removals. And then there's other proposed topic-based general permits for things like community scale solar, housing development that is below the commercial threshold, so that's between 1 and 4 units, common lake and shoreline activities, and electric and natural gas right-of-ways. If these general permits end up getting created, instead of having a permit that's specific to your site and specific to your use, this will speed it up because there will be a general permit that once it's determined you're doing one of these activities and that a permit's needed, it'll smooth in the path to get those a little more quickly. So, there is an acknowledgement at DEC that there is a need to, in these cases, try to speed the process up to the extent possible. We're going to open this up for questions now. Happy to answer questions that we can. Importantly, as I always say, if we do not know the answer, we will not pretend that we do, but we will get back to you and we will get the answer for you. Before I answer questions, I do just want to mention it is Pattern's 60th anniversary. We are having a big celebration this year in Poughkeepsie at the Grandview. We hope that many of you will choose to join us. If you want to scan that QR code, you can register or choose to sponsor today. Your attendance, your sponsorship, your registration supports our independent research that we do, like the project that we just shared here. We are going to be having a performance by the Beatles tribute band with the longest run in Broadway history because the Beatles arrived in America only 10 months before Pattern was founded. Give you a sense of just how old the organization is. And we hope we'll see you there. So I'm going to stop sharing now. Anyone who has a question, the best method would be to try to drop it in the chat, or if you want to raise your digital hand or your physical hand, we will do your best to call on you. So I see couple things here now. Will we receive a copy of the slides? Yes. Will we post a copy of the recording of these webinars on our YouTube page? We always post on social media. We can send out the link to everyone who registered to be part of the webinar. That's a yes. Are these new maps on the GIS property maps by county now? Jonathan, I'm not exactly sure how to answer that question. The maps we created are in GIS. They're on the site for the study. The informational map is on the DEC website. Easy to access and easy to get the layer if you need to get the layer for some purpose. Can you explain how the informational layer is used? How might an area that is mapped on that layer not be considered jurisdictional? Okay, so Eric will correct me here, but the method that was used to create the informational map was was built using technologies that can pick up on wetlands, but it doesn't necessarily pick up perfectly on all the wetlands and their exact boundaries. So there is the potential that the process that was done, I can't remember if it was GPS or LiDAR or what technology was used, but that process may have identified some potential wetlands on the informational map that either don't exist or they don't exist to the exact extent that is shown on the map. That's why once a determination is made that you're under jurisdiction or the parcel is likely under jurisdiction, the second step is then to have a biologist visit the site and confirm that, and then confirm the exact extent and delineation of the wetland itself. Did I mess anything up there, Eric?
No, that's accurate. I think another way that it would not be jurisdictional is if it doesn't meet the size threshold, which maybe you mentioned. But my understanding is that the informational wetlands map shows every single wetland that process that out of Cornell identified, whether or not it's regulated or not. So it might be just a small blob that still might trigger you to go through the JD process to make sure it's not regulated. And so that would be another example of when it wouldn't be.
Vinny from our friends at Alfandre Architecture mentioned, did some flagging. Parcel JD took 90 days and we submitted on the first day the site open for requests. Yes. One of the things that we are seeing is the process now gives DEC 90 days to make a determination. If they don't make a determination in 90 days, you can send certified letter, Eric?
Yes.
Certified letter, and they then have to make a determination within 10 days of that certified letter, or you're exempt from the regulation. One of the things we've seen a lot of evidence of, and have heard many, many stories about, is that the 90 days is going by. developers, investors, others are sending the letter and they're getting the determination on day 9 out of the 10. Okay, I mean, that's another anecdotal sign that the state has received more requests than perhaps it anticipated. I want to explain something I didn't explain during the slides about why that might be. Previous to this, the requests that would go through for permits were for projects. I have a project in a location, I see a wetland on the map, I'm going to apply for a permit because I have a project there. One of the things that we think is changing quite substantially is now this parcel JD process is being used as part of the land acquisition due diligence process. So instead of having a defined project, you now have a developer, an investor, a builder, a somebody who wants to go buy a piece of land, sees a wetland might be there, and is applying for a parcel JD as part of the liability process to understand what the playing field is likely to be if they choose to buy that parcel of land. So very important to understand now, instead of just getting projects, it is likely, highly possible, that DEC is now also getting prospects, land acquisition prospects, project prospects, not just projects that are actually well-formed and ready to go, which is going to drive up the number of applications as well. So that's something we've heard about, something we know is happening to some degree that's driving those numbers to be relatively high. How did the Hudson Valley and statewide requests in the last 6 months compare to what was coming through under the previous regs? Aaron, I got to be honest, I just don't have that answer. We could certainly ask that, but I don't have that answer as I sit here today. Can you confirm what it means by project JD? Is building not allowed at all on wetlands, or will wetland disturbance be allowed and under what terms? So project JD is a jurisdictional determination, which just says, is there a regulated wetland there or not? Does your activity fall under it? And Eric, do you want to answer, is building not allowed at all on wetlands? I mean, it's really a case by case basis. There's some mitigation steps that can be done. It's really a project specific determination. Eric, you want to expound?
Yeah, I think so I'll just reiterate from the beginning that the answer to that question has not changed from these new regulations, right? So it's what is regulated and what isn't has not changed.
Right.
So if you needed a permit for something under the old rules, you still need a permit for it now is one part of that answer. And so it'll sort of depend on whether the scope and scale of the project that you are proposing, and probably also the classification of the wetlands that you have. So like class 1, they're rated on a scale of 1 to 4, I believe, with 1 being like the most valuable critical wetlands. And so it would be worked out with the DEC, with your regional office, to understand if certain projects probably would, for all intents and purposes, be not allowed based on what you're trying to do. Some things maybe you're trying to do something minor, maybe it's in a within that 100-foot buffer, so it's not directly in the wetland. You might be able to get a permit if you change a couple of things about the project that would be worked out, those mitigating steps.
So my friend Dave Church asked a difficult question. Many municipal codes in the region have application filing and project design standards that are keyed into using the wetland maps from 1975 with the assumption they had legal status. What now with map status changed? Now, Dave, we can go back and ask that question. I think the assumption now is that once in step 2, the biologist comes out to your site and does a delineation, that probably becomes the quote unquote map for that site. That may mean that some municipal codes need to change what they're referencing, that it's going to be tied to the project JD or the delineation as accepted by DEC through the project JD process. But it's a good question that we can hunt down a better answer to. That's my sort of informed assumption on that one. What is the approximate cost to be engineered before making any formal applications? I mean, Valerie, that's gonna vary massively depending on, how big the wetland is that you have to delineate, how much frontage you have, the type of project. I don't think we could give you any sort of predictable answer on exactly what your engineering costs are going to be to determine whether you have a wetland and to delineate it as part of the process. Is the informational wetland updated following the process of ground truthing going forward? Yeah, that's the second stage in the process, Sean. That's, either a biologist from the DEC region or one that's hired by the applicant going out and ground truthing the map. That's usually done with a high resolution GPS device, literally walking the perimeter of the wetland, and doing other things that arrive at that, as I keep saying, that decision that's based on sound science. Is the size based on lot size? So if I have a 7-acre lot size and it has 5 acres of 5 acres of 100 acres of wetlands, would it be regulated? That's Dan's question. Eric, I think the simple answer here is that the regulated wetland size is based on the size of the wetland, not if you only have a certain proportion of it on your property. So it's based on the total size of the wetland. That slide
Yes.
showed you with the different sizes. And for the wetlands of unique importance, it's wetlands of any size. So, and I think many of the wetlands in our region are likely to fit one of the 11 categories of unique importance. Access copy of the slides, yes. If those urban wetland regulations are found to be in conflict with New York State smart growth goals, how should/will the state proceed? Yeah, I think, Rachel, it's a difficult question. As of now, there are wetlands regulations. There is a process to get a permit. Those regulations are promulgated. When you look at, we zoomed into many of the urban areas, sort of what you would consider many of the core urban areas that are within the boundaries of small cities. There didn't seem to be a gigantic change, but certainly there are changes. I don't want to underrepresent the scope of the changes, but you'll have to go through a permitting process. That's essentially the way it's set up now. Okay, what does JD stand for? That got taken care of. How did the new DC regulations affect local municipal wetland regulations? That one got, I think that one got answered. But Eric, how did the new DC regulations affect local municipal wetland regulations? Would local regulations be preempted by a DEC JD? Maybe.
I mean, I think,
Yeah.
go ahead, Evan.
No, good. You go ahead.
I was going to say, and we do have a response here from someone else in the audience saying, great question. I've been working with local municipalities on updating their wetlands regs, and we're curious how this is handled as well. And I think that would echo exactly what I would say.
Yeah, and Javid, from a legal standpoint, if you want to turn your camera back on because you have an answer to this, go ahead.
So what was the question there, Adam?
Yeah, the question was, how do the new DEC regulations affect local municipal wetland regulations? Would local municipal wetland regulations be preempted by a DEC jurisdictional determination?
Yeah, the answer to that is certainly no. With any changes at the state level, municipalities need to make sure that their local regulations align with that. There's an argument that local regulations could be more restrictive, but the baseline would be you have to meet the state minimum requirements.
All right, thanks for that. Hey, stay tuned in case we run into any other hiccups. Anyone have any experience yet with submittal for a JD with anticipatory evaluation of site wetlands by wetland biologists for value species habitat that objectively address the new criteria up front? So Eric, yes. If you want to send us an email, I can't recite that to you here, but we certainly interviewed many folks who had done sort of what I would call, go get your delineation done ahead of time so that once you got the JD, you already had the delineation, and to try to kind of get the process sped up a little bit, we can hook you up with someone who's done that or who's been thinking that way. Yes, we have the link for the map. Oh, let's see here. Okay, that's good. Are the 12-acre threshold for a single area or the cumulative area of the project parcel? So Jonathan, I think it's based on the area of, I think again, it's based on the area of the wetland, not how much of it might be fronting on your parcel or not. I think that's just an important we answered that question earlier. Do the regulations apply equally to residential and commercial development projects? Yes, Heinrich, and I think the one thing we highlighted on that last slide was the state is working on a special, a special permit for housing projects of 1 to 4 units. That doesn't mean the regulations apply differently, but it does mean there might be a slightly faster path to get a permit for projects like that. So we'll see how that goes. We are going to give people back 10 minutes. So hold on one second. Regarding the EAF P1, has DEC EAF mapper been updated to be keyed to the new non-regulatory map? So Alicia, are you asking essentially if is there a link that references it? Unless Eric knows offhand, I can definitely get back to you on that, Alicia.
Okay, yeah,
So
it's just that, when you fill it out now,
Yep.
it'll auto-populate if in the database it's potentially near a wetland. So
right.
has it been updated? Is there a plan for it to be updated?
Yeah, we'll check on that one and get back to
Yeah,
you.
I don't know.
Okay, thanks.
So I just want to, we're going to give you back any recommendations for land trusts who include wetlands layers in their easement and their easement baseline maps. I mean, Sean, that's a really, really difficult question. I mean, unless you wanted to just include the informational wetlands layer and say that it's provisional, I mean, that's something that you could do. You could go out and do delineation and sort of verify the extent of the informational map in the area that your land trust serves. I think those are some things you could do. You could always talk to Brian Drum at Region 3 about what the correct approach might be for that. And thanks. And we're going to wrap this up. I just want to say one more time a couple things. It's important to remember that wetlands are important. And, we wanted to make sure that we did a study that, as I say, really came from a point of informational neutrality. We want to make sure people understand. I was saying in plain language, whether you are an environmentalist who cares about all the scientific and technical aspects of wetlands, or you just like listening to spring peepers in the spring. I think everyone in their own way can understand that wetlands are important for all the different ecosystem services that they provide to our community and to our region. Our findings indicate that that while the state has taken a very important step to regulate and identify more of these wetlands, especially in light of what appears to be the federal government dialing back its role, we also have to be careful that we don't add a lot of lag time and a lot of new costs to a development and land use review process that is already far too long and far too expensive. And we're seeing the ramifications of that every day and our ability to build things we need to create jobs and to create homes in the region. We do not want to be doing development that gives up, wetlands or harms critical habitats. So finding that balance, which I think is the big challenge for DEC in the months ahead, and making sure that the process is adequately staffed up to turn around good science-based answers to people who are trying to make investments in the region is really where the most focus needs to be paid based on the early things that we see in the data, in the anecdotes, in the experiences of both our friends from the environmental community and the development community. So with that, we are always open. We're happy to see emails from you. Tell us what you think. Tell us if you think this was a great job or if we stink and need new jobs. We're open to hear anything from you. We're also open to hearing your ideas for other civic issues that deserve, an in-depth objective look by our professional research and planning staff. So thanks to all of you. We'll keep on top of this. We hope to see you at the 60th anniversary celebration, and we hope you all have a great remainder of the summer. Thanks for joining us.